The humming of alien engines was the first thing Ethan Kane noticed as he stepped onto the Jakath. The ship was larger than anything he had ever seen. Huge metal corridors, glowing blue lights running along the walls, and the faint sound of mechanical systems deep in the background. It felt like stepping inside the chest of a living giant. Ethan was not a soldier. He was an engineer, one of the best on Earth, chosen to help repair the Alliance fleet after months of conflict with raiders. His job was simple: fix what was broken and keep the peace between the humans and the Valari warrior race. But he knew this job was not like any other. The Valari were not just another alien race. They were proud, strong, and very protective of their traditions. Two tall Valari warriors guided Ethan through the halls. Their armor gleamed under the lights marked with strange golden lines. They walked in silence, their clawed hands resting on their curved weapons. Ethan swallowed nervously. He had been warned that the Valari respected strength and courage above all else. Humans had earned their place in the Alliance only after proving themselves in battle. Ethan had never fought anyone. He only knew machines. Finally, the guard stopped in front of a large door. It opened with a hiss, revealing a wide chamber. At its center stood a figure so commanding that Ethan almost forgot to breathe. Queen Arvis Catal. She was taller than any human, her presence filling the room like a storm. Her armor was dark, lined with faintly glowing silver, and her golden eyes watched him sharply. There was no crown, no throne, only her straight posture and the way every other warrior in the room kept a respectful distance from her. "You are the human engineer?" Her voice was deep, calm, and sharp at the same time. "Yes, Your Majesty," Ethan said, his voice steadier than he felt. She nodded once. "Then you will work." She stepped aside and one of the warriors brought forward a set of armor pieces. They were badly damaged. Burn marks, cracked joints, and one chest plate almost split down the middle. Ethan crouched beside the pieces, running his gloved fingers across the metal. The Valari armor was far beyond human technology. It was not just metal but living alloy, humming faintly as if it had its own heartbeat. Ethan focused on the cracked chest plate joint. It looked simple enough to fix. He reached out with his tool to inspect it. A flash of movement. In an instant, Queen Arvis was in front of him. Her clawed hand grabbed his wrist, stopping him cold. Her grip was like iron and her golden eyes burned into him. "Not there," she said, her voice quiet but filled with power. "Never touch it." The entire room went silent. The guard stiffened. Even the air seemed to freeze. Ethan blinked, startled, his heart hammering. I was only checking the damage," he said carefully. Her grip did not loosen. For a long moment she simply stared at him, as if weighing something inside her mind. Then slowly she released his wrist. "Fix the rest," she ordered, her tone sharp again. "Leave that joint alone." Ethan nodded quickly. "Understood." She turned and walked away, her cloak brushing the floor behind her. The room slowly came back to life, warriors returning to their stations, but Ethan could feel their eyes on him. Whatever he had almost done had been serious. He worked in silence for hours, repairing the other parts of the armor. He replaced burned plates, aligned power conduits, and recharged the inner shield core. But his mind kept returning to the moment she had stopped him. What was so important about that joint? Why had she reacted so strongly? When he was done, he carefully arranged the armor pieces and reported to one of the guards. "Everything is repaired, except for the joint, as the Queen ordered." The guard only gave a short nod and said nothing. Later, when Ethan returned to his quarters on the ship, he could not sleep. The image of the Queen's golden eyes stayed in his mind. There had been no anger in them, only warning and something deeper he could not name. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had fixed hundreds of machines, from simple shuttles to massive orbital stations. Nothing had ever been off limits before. But now, for the first time, he had found something he was forbidden to touch, and that made him want to know the truth even more. Ethan woke early the next day. The alien ship was strangely quiet, its halls dim under the soft blue light that marked morning for the Valari. He grabbed his toolkit and went back to the armor bay. The damaged set was still there, resting on a stand. The cracked chestplate joint gleamed faintly, as if daring him to come closer. He stared at it for a moment, remembering Queen Arvis's grip on his wrist. Her voice echoed in his head. "Not there. Never touch it." The other Valari engineers arrived soon after, speaking in their deep, rumbling language. They barely looked at him. Ethan had noticed that since yesterday the warriors seemed to watch him more carefully. He wondered if he had broken some law just by reaching for the joint. He forced himself to focus on work. There were still repairs to finish on the ship's engines, and that was something he understood well. He spent the next few hours checking conduits, patching plasma lines, and calibrating the main reactor controls. But curiosity kept pulling him back to the armor. When the bay was empty, he slowly approached the chest plate. He didn't touch it. He wasn't ready to risk the Queen's anger again, but he knelt and looked closer. Near the joint, he saw something he had missed before, a tiny symbol etched into the metal. It was almost hidden, a small mark shaped like a crescent and a single line through it. "What are you?" he whispered. A deep voice behind him made him jump. "You should not look too closely, human." Ethan turned. One of the Volari guards stood there, tall and silent as a shadow. His golden eyes studied Ethan, but there was no anger, only warning. "I was just curious," Ethan said. The guard's face did not change. Curiosity is dangerous where the Queen is concerned. Then he turned and left. Ethan exhaled slowly. The mystery was growing, and no one would tell him the answer. That night, his chance came. The ship alarm suddenly blared through the corridors, turning the calm blue lights into flashing red. "Enemy contact," a voice announced in accented human speech. "All warriors to stations." Ethan grabbed his toolkit and ran toward the engineering deck. The Jakath shook as enemy fire hit the hull. Sparks rained from the ceiling and the lights flickered. He found the main plasma conduit overheating, threatening to overload. The Volari engineers were busy keeping shields online, so Ethan took the risk himself. He climbed into the narrow access tunnel and began rerouting power. The heat was intense and the metal burned through his gloves, but he kept working. Another hit rocked the ship. The tunnel almost collapsed on him, but he held on and finished the repair. The conduit stabilized, the warning lights turning green, plasma flow restored. Someone shouted over the comms. The ship's weapons roared to life again, firing back at the enemy raiders. Ethan crawled out, covered in sweat and soot but alive. When the battle ended, the ship floated quietly in space, its shields holding. The Volari had won. Later, Queen Arves herself came to the engineering deck. The warriors around her stood at attention. She stopped in front of Ethan. "You saved my ship," she said, her tone calm but carrying weight. Ethan straightened. "I just did my job, Your Majesty." For a moment, something like respect flashed in her golden eyes. "Then you will keep doing it." She turned to leave, then paused. "And remember my order. That joint stays untouched." "Yes, Your Majesty," Ethan said. She walked away, her cloak sweeping behind her. But Ethan was more curious than ever. Why was that one piece of armor so sacred? Why did even the mention of it make the crew uncomfortable? That night, as he lay in his quarters, he thought about the mark he had seen. It wasn't just a piece of technology. It meant something important, and he was determined to find out what. Days passed after the battle, but the ship still carried the tension of war. Warriors moved quickly through the halls, repairing damage and preparing for another fight. Ethan spent long hours in engineering, but his mind kept returning to the cracked chestplate joint. The memory of Queen Arves seizing his wrist haunted him like a puzzle that refused to be solved. One evening, as he finished repairing a damaged shield relay, a message came through the comm. "Engineer Kane, report to the sanctum." Ethan froze. The sanctum was a place he had only heard about from whispers. It was said to hold the history of the Volari, relics, trophies, and symbols of their greatest victories. Few outsiders were ever allowed inside. He followed two guards through winding corridors until they reached a great door marked with glowing runes. The doors opened slowly, revealing a vast, quiet hall. Strange banners hung from the ceiling, and weapons of all kinds were displayed along the walls. At the far end stood Queen Arves, waiting for him. "Come forward," she said, her voice steady. Ethan walked carefully across the smooth floor, feeling as if the eyes of every warrior ancestor were watching him. "You risked your life for this ship," Arves said. "You faced fire and death with no weapon in your hands. That is the way of the Volari." Ethan bowed his head slightly. "I only did what was necessary." She studied him for a long moment before turning and gesturing for him to follow. She led him to a small alcove where a single suit of ancient armor stood. Its metal was darker, older, and more scarred than any he had seen. A faint symbol, the same as the one Ethan had seen on her chestplate joint, was etched deep into the center. "This," Arves said quietly, "is the oath of the heart. Every Volari who claims the throne must bear a wound in combat that proves their worth." That mark is not decoration. It is the memory of blood, pain, and survival. Ethan looked closer, realizing the armor was dented where a blade had once struck. So your armor, he began, hides my own mark, Arvis finished for him. Her golden eyes met his. The joint you reached for protects the scar I carry. Touching it without permission is an insult to my honor, and to the crown itself. Ethan finally understood why she had reacted so fiercely. I didn't know, he said quietly. Now you do. Her tone softened slightly. You are not Valari, so I do not hold your mistake against you. But know this, what you touched is not just metal. It is who I am. He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. Before he could speak again, the ship's alarm rang through the sanctum. A warrior ran inside, bowing quickly. Enemy warship approaching! Larger than the last. Arvis turned, her expression hardening instantly. Prepare for battle, she ordered. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He had seen how close the last attack had come to destroying the Jakath. If this ship was bigger, stronger, and faster, they might not survive. Engineer, Arvis said, turning back to him. Get to engineering. Keep my ship alive. Yes, Your Majesty. He ran as fast as he could through the halls, passing warriors arming themselves for battle. The ship shook as the first enemy shots struck the shields. Sparks lit the corridors. In engineering, Ethan saw that the enemy's first strike had damaged the main power grid. If he didn't stabilize it quickly, the ship would lose shields completely. He worked as fast as his hands would move, rerouting circuits and locking down leaking plasma lines. The deck vibrated with each hit the ship took. Through the comm, he heard the captain's voice. Shields failing. Hull breach on deck 3. Ethan gritted his teeth. He had to keep the systems online no matter what. If the ship fell, the Queen and her warriors would be captured or worse. When the power grid finally came back online, the lights brightened and the shields stabilized. The warriors cheered over the comm, but the battle was far from over. Ethan knew this fight would not end quickly. And if the ship was damaged again, it might come down to more than just repairing conduits. For the first time, he realized he might have to break the Queen's command if it meant keeping her alive. The enemy warship closed in fast. Red warning lights flashed across the Jakath as the hull shook from heavy impacts. Ethan held on to the nearest console while alarms screamed in his ears. The Valari ship was strong, but the enemy's weapons were stronger. Through the comm, Ethan heard Queen Arves's voice, calm but commanding. Warriors, hold the line. We fight until the last spark. Ethan's hands moved quickly over the control panels. He rerouted power to shields, patched emergency circuits, and kept the engines running as best he could. But each hit made the ship weaker. Smoke filled the air, and the temperature in engineering climbed higher. Suddenly, a call came over the comm. The Queen is on the front deck. Her armor is failing. Ethan froze for a moment. His mind flashed back to the cracked chest plate joint and the scar it hid. If the armor failed completely, Arvis would be exposed to enemy fire. She might not survive. He grabbed his toolkit and ran through the halls, dodging falling debris and rushing warriors. The ship rocked again, throwing him against the wall, but he pushed forward until he reached the armory deck where the Queen fought. The scene was chaos. Valari warriors clashed with boarding troops in the wide hall. Blades struck against armor. Plasma bolts lit the air and the smell of burned metal filled the room. At the center of it all, Queen Arvis stood like a storm, her spear cutting down enemies with deadly precision. But Ethan saw it. The crack in her chest plate had spread. The joint was failing. He ducked behind a support pillar and pulled out his repair tool. If I don't fix that now, she's going to get hit, he whispered to himself. But he remembered her words clearly. Not there. Never touch it, his heart pounded. If he broke her command, he could lose her trust forever. But if he didn't act, she could die, and the whole ship might fall with her. He made his choice. Ethan sprinted through the battle, ducking past warriors and leaping over fallen enemies. He reached Arvis just as an enemy soldier fired at her. Ethan tackled her from the side, knocking her behind a column. The shot missed by inches. Arvis's golden eyes widened as she saw him. Engineer? What are you? No time, Ethan shouted. He pressed the emergency seal on her chest plate joint, locking the broken plates in place. The armor hissed as it fused together. For a moment, there was silence. Arvis looked down at his hand, still holding the tool over the forbidden spot. Her eyes flashed with something Ethan couldn't read. Then an enemy charged at them. Arvis spun, drove her spear through the attacker and stood tall again. The repaired joint glowed faintly, stronger than before. She turned back to Ethan. "You touched it," she said softly, almost like a whisper. Ethan swallowed hard. "I had to. You would have been killed." Her expression stayed unreadable for a moment, then she simply nodded. "Then fight with me," Ethan blinked. "I'm not a—" She threw him a fallen enemy's plasma rifle. "You are now." Before he could argue, more enemies charged. Arves led the counterattack, and Ethan followed, firing the rifle as best he could. The Volari warriors rallied around them, pushing the enemy back step by step. After what felt like hours, the boarding troops finally retreated. The Jakath's weapons roared one last time, striking the enemy warship until it broke apart in a bright explosion outside the viewports. The battle was over. Ethan stood among the warriors, breathing hard, covered in sweat and soot. The deck was littered with broken weapons and armor. The queen stood at the center, her spear still in hand, her golden eyes scanning the room. Slowly, the warriors lowered their weapons and bowed their heads to her, but no one spoke. All eyes turned to Ethan, who was still standing close to the queen, his hand stained with repair gel from touching the forbidden joint. He felt every stare like a weight on his back. Would they punish him? Exile him worse? Queen Arvis finally stepped forward. She looked at Ethan for a long moment. "Come to the sanctum," she said at last. "All of you." Without another word, she turned and walked away, her armor still glowing faintly where he had repaired it. Ethan followed, his heart pounding. He had broken her command. Now he would learn what the price of that choice would be. The sanctum was quiet when Ethan entered. The air was cool, carrying the faint hum of ancient energy from the relics displayed along the walls. Warriors stood in respectful silence, their golden eyes fixed on the queen. Even in victory, the Volari honored ritual. Today they would see how the queen judged the one who had broken her command. Ethan felt a weight in his chest. He had touched the forbidden joint to save her life. He had disobeyed the queen, yet he had acted out of necessity. Still, the fear of punishment pressed on him. Arves stood at the far end of the room, her armor gleaming faintly where he had repaired it. The scar hidden beneath the joint was still unseen, but the energy from the repair hummed softly, a reminder of what he had done. "You have come," Arves said, her voice echoing through the hall. Ethan stepped forward. "Yes, Your Majesty." The warriors shifted but said nothing. Silence filled the room. All eyes were on the queen and the human who had dared touch what was forbidden. Arves walked toward the center, her gaze never leaving Ethan. "You broke my command," she said slowly. "You touched the joint that is sacred. Do you understand what that means?" "I do, Your Majesty," Ethan said. "But I had no choice. If I had not acted, you would have died, and the ship might have been lost. I only wanted to protect you." The queen studied him. Her golden eyes softened slightly, yet the weight of her authority was clear. She raised her hand and all the warriors lowered their weapons further. "Many have failed this test," she said. "They have disobeyed and the consequences were severe, but you acted with courage, without hesitation, and without fear for yourself. You protected the life of a Volari, even when it meant breaking the rules." Ethan's heart pounded. Could it be possible that she would forgive him? Arves stopped a few feet from him. She reached up and slowly removed the chest plate, revealing the scar hidden beneath. The mark was long and deep, a reminder of the battle that had made her queen. It was not just a scar, it was her history, her honor, her strength. "You touched this," she said softly, looking at him, "and yet you saved my life. That is not a challenge. That is respect. That is honor." Ethan bowed his head, unable to speak. Relief washed over him like a cool wave. The queen turned to the warriors. "This human," she said, her voice clear and strong, "has earned more than trust. He has earned a place among us. Today he becomes a brother of the Volari, the first outsider to hold such honor." The warriors' golden eyes widened, and then they bowed deeply. Murmurs of approval filled the room. Ethan felt the weight of centuries of tradition on him, and yet it was not heavy, it was a gift. Arves placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. "You acted without thinking of glory or reward. That is what matters. Courage and heart are stronger than rules when lives are at stake." Ethan looked up at her, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion on his face. I only did what anyone would do, Your Majesty." "No," she said firmly, her eyes meeting his. Not anyone. Few would risk the Queen's wrath to save her. Few would act with such certainty and skill. You have proven yourself worthy of Valari respect. The room was silent for a moment. Ethan felt the eyes of the warriors on him, and he realized he was no longer just a human engineer. He was part of something greater, a community built on honor, courage, and loyalty. Later, when the crowd had dispersed, Arves spoke to him privately. You broke the rule, she said softly, but you kept me alive. That is the kind of defiance a queen respects. Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility.
I will not forget this, Your Majesty.
I will do my best to honor the Valari. Arves smiled faintly, a gesture that was rare and precious. Then you will be welcome always. You have my trust, and that is worth more than any rule. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest he had never known. He had come to the Jakath as a human engineer, an outsider in an alien world. He had faced fear, fought in a battle he barely understood, and touched what he was forbidden to touch. And in doing so, he had earned not only the Queen's respect but a place among the strongest and bravest warriors he had ever met. As the two of them looked out over the stars from the sanctum's windows, Ethan knew one thing clearly. He had found a bond that went beyond rules and tradition, beyond fear and duty. It was a bond of honor, courage, and trust, the kind that could survive anything, even across worlds. The Jakath floated peacefully in space, its shields glowing softly, its crew alive and victorious. And in the heart of the ship, a human engineer and a Valari queen had formed a connection that would be remembered for generations. The scar was hidden, the joint repaired, but the lesson was clear. True honor is measured not by rules alone, but by the courage to act when it matters most. Ethan smiled, finally at peace. He had done more than fix machines. He had saved a life, earned respect, and stepped into a world where he truly belonged. And the Queen's golden eyes watched him not with anger, but with something far rarer, approval, trust, and the quiet acknowledgement of bravery.